The lawyer's office smelled like expensive leather and bad intentions. I sat there in my good blazer, the one Margaret always said made me look distinguished, and I watched my granddaughter smile at me from across the conference table. Kristen looked beautiful that day, 26 years old, blonde hair pulled back, wearing a cream-colored blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She had her mother's eyes, my son David's eyes, really. And for just a moment, I saw the little girl who used to sit on my lap and ask me to tell her stories about the army. That little girl was gone now. The woman sitting across from me had come to steal everything I had left. Her attorney, some slick guy in a $3,000 suit, slid a document across the mahogany table. "Mr. Hollister," he said, "this is a petition for emergency guardianship. Given your recent episodes and the concerns your granddaughter has raised about your mental state, we believe it's in your best interest to have someone manage your affairs." I looked down at the paperwork. 32 pages of legal language that essentially said I was too old, too confused, and too dangerous to handle my own life. They wanted control of my bank accounts, my pension, my house, everything. Kristen leaned forward, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "Grandpa, this is for your own good. You've been forgetting things. You've been paranoid. Remember when you accused me of going through your desk?" She shook her head sadly. "We just want to help you." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Then I smiled. "You made one mistake, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "You forgot who taught your father everything he knows about finding people's secrets." Her smile flickered, just for a second, but I saw it.
What I had waiting in my car, a folder containing 18 months of evidence, would destroy her entire case. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how my own granddaughter tried to steal my life, how she tried to have me declared incompetent, how she tampered with my brakes and nearly killed me on Highway 98, and how a dead woman's diary saved me from all of it. My name is Raymond Hollister. Most people call me Ray. I'm 62 years old, and I spent 28 years in the United States Army, most of it in military intelligence. I retired as a lieutenant colonel in 2018, and I thought I'd seen every kind of deception the world had to offer. I was wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved? Someone you would have given everything to protect? If you have, I want you to drop a comment below. And if you believe that getting older should never make you an easy target, subscribe to this channel, because this story is for everyone who's ever been underestimated. Now, let me take you back to where this really started. I've been married twice. My first wife, Helen, was my high school sweetheart from right here in Pensacola. We got married in 1985, the same year I finished my officer training. She followed me around the world: Germany, Korea, Fort Bragg, the Pentagon. She gave me a son, David, and she was the best thing that ever happened to me. Helen died in 2006. A drunk driver crossed the center line on her way home from church. She was 44 years old. David was 18, about to start college. I was stationed at Fort Huachuca in Arizona, and I got the call at 2 in the morning. I didn't know it then, but Margaret had been trying to protect me from beyond the grave. That realization would come later, and it would change everything.
After Helen died, I threw myself into my work. Intelligence analysis, counterintelligence. The kind of work where you learn to see patterns that other people miss, where you learn that the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in just enough truth to seem real. I met Margaret in 2009 at a veterans support group in Pensacola. She was a Navy widow. Her husband had died of cancer 3 years earlier. She had kind eyes and a laugh that could fill a room, and she understood what it meant to lose someone you'd built your whole life around. We got married in 2010. 5 years later, I retired from the Army, and we settled into a quiet life in Pensacola. I had my pension, some investments, a paid-off house in a nice subdivision. Nothing fancy, but comfortable. Margaret and I were happy. Then, 2 years ago, Margaret had a stroke. It happened on a Tuesday morning. She was making coffee, and suddenly she was on the floor. I called 911. I held her hand in the ambulance. I sat in that hospital waiting room for 6 hours while doctors tried to save her. She died that night. 58 years old. No warning, no goodbye. And just like that, I was alone again. Stop. I need you to understand something about military intelligence work. We're trained to see what people are hiding. We're trained to notice when someone's story doesn't quite add up, when their body language contradicts their words, when the details shift just a little too much between tellings. But here's what they don't tell you. All that training goes out the window when it's your own family, when it's your own blood. You want to believe them so badly that you blind yourself to everything you've learned. That's what happened with Kristen.
After Margaret died, I was a mess. I barely ate. I couldn't sleep. I'd walk through the house at 3 a.m, looking for her, knowing she wasn't there. My son David called from Seattle every week, but he had his own life. A demanding job, 2 teenagers, a wife who worked 60 hours a week. He couldn't just drop everything and move to Florida. But Kristen could. She showed up about 3 months after the funeral, said she'd taken a remote job so she could be closer to me, said she wanted to help her grandpa through this difficult time. She was going through her own troubles, a divorce, a custody battle for her little daughter Lily, and I thought maybe we could help each other. She started coming over twice a week, cooking dinner, helping me sort through Margaret's things, sitting with me on the porch while I told her stories about the old days. She was attentive, caring, everything a grieving old man could hope for in a granddaughter. She was also systematically stealing from me, but I didn't know that yet. About 6 months after Margaret died, Kristen brought over some paperwork. "Grandpa," she said, "I've been thinking. You're doing great, but what if something happened? What if you had a fall or got sick and couldn't handle things for a while? I think we should set up a power of attorney, just in case, just so someone can pay your bills if you're in the hospital." I was still deep in grief. I wasn't thinking clearly. And she was my granddaughter, the little girl who used to call me Papa Ray and beg for piggyback rides. So I signed the papers. That was the biggest mistake of my life. For the next year, I didn't notice anything wrong. Kristen kept visiting. She helped me set up a new computer when my old one crashed. She organized my filing cabinet. She was always around, always helpful, always asking how I was doing. And then, about 8 months after Margaret's death, I finally found the strength to clean out her closet.
It took me a while to work up to it. Every time I opened that closet door and smelled her perfume, something broke inside me. But I knew I had to do it eventually. Margaret would have wanted me to move forward. I started with the shoeboxes, then the dresses, then the cardigans. Margaret loved her cardigans, had about 15 of them in every color. I was folding her favorite one, a soft gray thing she wore almost every Sunday, when I felt something in the pocket. It was a small leather journal, the kind you'd buy at a bookstore, about the size of my palm. I'd never seen it before. I sat down on the edge of the bed and opened it. Margaret's handwriting filled the pages, dates going back 2 years, little observations about her day, her thoughts, her worries. And then I got to the last entry. It was dated 3 days before her stroke. "Something is wrong with Kristen," she wrote. I caught her going through Ray's desk again. She said she was looking for stamps, but I saw her photographing his bank statements. I don't trust her. I need to tell Ray before it's too late. I just don't know how to make him see it. My hands were shaking by the time I finished reading. Have you ever felt that? When you realize that someone you trusted has been lying to your face for months, maybe years, and you were too blind to see it? Margaret knew. She tried to warn me, and she died before she could. I sat on that bed for a long time, holding her diary, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But now there was something else too. Something cold and focused and very, very patient. 28 years in military intelligence, I knew exactly how to run an investigation. The next morning, I drove to my bank and requested complete statements for all my accounts going back 2 years. The manager was a little surprised. Most people do that online now. But she printed everything out for me. That night, I spread the statements across my kitchen table and started going through them line by line. and that's when I saw it. Small transfers, 200 here, 500 there, always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic fraud alerts, always to accounts I didn't recognize. Over 18 months, someone had transferred $47,000 out of my accounts. I pulled up my online banking. Every single transfer had been authorized through the website, using my login credentials. But I hadn't made those transfers. I never used online banking for anything except checking my balance. Margaret used to handle all the bills. Someone had my passwords. Someone had been watching. The next week, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called an old army buddy. Thomas Okonkwo and I had served together in Germany back in the 90s. He'd been a sergeant major in the Signal Corps, and when he retired, he started a cybersecurity firm in Atlanta. I hadn't talked to him in maybe 5 years, but when I called and explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. "Ship me your laptop and your phone," he said. "I'll have my team look at them. And Ray, don't tell anyone you're doing this, not even family." Especially not family, I thought. While I waited for Thomas's analysis, I decided to follow up on something else that had been bothering me. About 2 months earlier, I'd gone to pick up my blood pressure medication, and the pharmacy had seemed strange. The pharmacist, a woman I'd seen there for years, had looked at me oddly and asked if I was feeling okay. At the time, I thought she was just making small talk. Now I wasn't so sure. I drove to Bayview Family Pharmacy on a Thursday afternoon. Patricia Delgado was behind the counter, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes. When she saw me walk in, her face went pale.
"Mr. Hollister," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I need to show you something. Can you come to the back?" I followed her into a small office behind the pharmacy counter. She closed the door and pulled out a manila folder. "3 times in the past year," she said, "someone has tried to fill prescriptions for lorazepam in your name. It's a sedative. Can cause confusion, memory problems, drowsiness. Each time, the signature on the prescription didn't match your records. I flagged them and refused to fill them." She showed me the paperwork. 3 different dates, 3 forged prescriptions. If those had been filled, and if someone had been slipping sedatives into my food, I would have seemed confused, forgetful, maybe even incompetent. "Why didn't you contact me?" I asked. Pat looked down. "I tried calling the number on file. A woman answered, said she was your caregiver and that you were resting, said she'd pass along the message. She met my eyes. I should have pushed harder. I should have come to your house. My own father. Someone did this to him. I've never forgiven myself for not catching it sooner." I put my hand on her shoulder. "You caught it," I said. "That's what matters." She gave me copies of everything. Dates, prescription numbers, the fake signatures. One more piece of the puzzle. A week later, Thomas called with his findings. "Ray," he said, "I've got bad news and worse news. Your laptop has a keylogger installed. That software that records everything you type. Passwords, bank information, emails, everything. Your phone has GPS tracking software. Someone's been monitoring your location in real time." I felt my stomach drop. "When was this installed?" "According to the timestamps, the keylogger was installed on your laptop 14 months ago." "Want me to tell you the exact date?" I already knew what he was going to say, but I needed to hear it anyway. He read me the date. I pulled up my calendar, the one where I still wrote things down by hand, the way Margaret taught me. I flipped back 14 months, and there it was, the exact week that Kristen had helped me set up my new computer. My granddaughter hadn't just been stealing from me, she'd been surveilling me, tracking my movements, recording my passwords. She tried to drug me into incompetence, and now she was trying to have me declared mentally unfit. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have imagined, was how far she was willing to go to finish what she started. Because the next attack wasn't going to be legal. It wasn't going to be financial. It was going to be on a highway at 70 miles per hour, when my brakes stopped working. 3 weeks after Thomas sent me his report, I was driving north on Highway 98 to meet him in person. He'd flown into Pensacola to help me prepare a formal case,
and we'd agreed to meet at a diner near the airport. It was a Tuesday afternoon, light traffic, clear skies. I was doing about 65 in the right lane, thinking about everything I'd learned, when I came up on a curve and pressed my brake pedal. Nothing happened. I pressed harder. The pedal went straight to the floor. No resistance, no response. My speedometer was climbing, 70, 75. The curve was coming up fast, and beyond it was an intersection. I could see the cross-traffic in the distance. 28 years in the Army teaches you a lot of things. One of them is how to stay calm when everything is falling apart. I didn't panic. I didn't freeze. I downshifted hard, feeling the transmission grind as the engine fought to slow the truck. I pulled the emergency brake with my right hand, felt the rear wheels lock and skid. The truck was still going too fast. I had maybe 3 seconds before the curve. I made a choice. I yanked the wheel to the right and aimed for the drainage ditch.
The impact was brutal. The airbag exploded in my face. I felt my shoulder slam against the door, felt glass shatter somewhere behind me. The world spun, flipped, and then went still. I don't know how long I sat there in that ditch, hanging sideways from my seatbelt, tasting blood in my mouth. Long enough for someone to stop and call 911. Long enough for the paramedics to cut me out. Long enough to understand exactly what had happened. Someone had tried to kill me. At the hospital, they told me I was lucky. Bruised ribs, a minor concussion, a shoulder that would hurt like hell for a few weeks. Nothing permanent. Thomas showed up 2 hours later. He took one look at me in that hospital bed and said, "I want that truck examined, not by the police, by someone I trust." The police report called it mechanical failure, just an old truck with worn brake lines. These things happen. Thomas's mechanic saw something different. The brake line was cut, he told us 3 days later, pointing at the photographs. See here? Clean cut, then loosely reconnected. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. It was designed to hold under normal driving, then fail under stress. A hard brake, a curve, highway speed, that's when it would let go. I stared at those photographs for a long time. I'm 62 years old. I served my country for 28 years. I've been in combat zones. I've had people try to kill me before, but they were enemies. They were strangers. They were people who wore their hatred openly. This was my granddaughter, my own blood, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest while I read her bedtime stories. She had tried to murder me. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound I'd taken in that crash, deeper than anything I'd felt since Helen died, maybe even deeper than losing Margaret.
But I want you to know something. Even then, even in that hospital bed, looking at evidence that my granddaughter had tried to put me in the ground, I didn't feel rage. I didn't want revenge, not in the ugly sense of the word. What I wanted was justice. What I wanted was to make sure she could never do this to anyone else. And what I wanted, more than anything, was to understand why. That last part would come later. For the next 2 weeks, I played it cool. I told the police I accepted their mechanical failure explanation. I told Kristen, who came to visit me in the hospital, tears in her eyes, so concerned about her poor grandpa, that I was feeling better every day. I smiled, I hugged her, I let her think she'd won. And every night, I added to my file. Bank records, digital forensics, pharmacy documents, the mechanic's report. I was building a case, piece by piece, the way I'd learned to do over 3 decades of intelligence work. But Kristen wasn't just going to wait for me to recover. She had her own timeline, and she was getting desperate. 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital, she made her next move. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard the knock. I opened the door to find 2 Pensacola police officers on my porch. One of them was holding a piece of paper. "Mr. Raymond Hollister," the older one said. "That's me. Sir, we have a temporary restraining order against you. You're prohibited from contacting or coming within 500 feet of Kristen Hollister Warren. You're also required to surrender any firearms in your possession." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you talking about? On what grounds?" The officer looked uncomfortable. "Sir, Ms. Warren has filed a domestic violence complaint. She alleges that during a recent visit you grabbed her arm and threatened to," he checked the paper, "to make her regret ever being born. She has photographs of bruising consistent with her account." I stood there in my doorway, in my bathrobe, with my coffee getting cold in my hand, and I understood exactly what was happening.
Kristen had gone to the police with a fake bruise and a fake story. She'd painted me as a violent, unstable old man who was becoming a danger to his family. And now I had a restraining order that would keep me from gathering any more evidence against her. It was brilliant, really. Cold and calculated, and absolutely brilliant. "Sir," the officer said, "do you have any firearms on the premises?" I handed over my grandfather's hunting rifle and my service pistol. They gave me a receipt. They told me a court date would be scheduled. They left. That night, my phone rang. It was David, my son, my only living child. "Dad," he said, and his voice was tight with something I couldn't identify. "I just talked to Kristen. She told me what happened." "David, I never touched her. She's lying. She's been stealing from me. Dad, stop." He sighed. "Kristen said you've been having episodes. She said you've been paranoid, accusing her of things, seeing conspiracies everywhere. She said," he paused, "she said you've been getting worse since Margaret died." "That's not true. David, listen to me." "I'm flying in this weekend," he said. "We need to talk about this in person. We need to talk about options." The line went dead. I sat in my empty house, in the dark, and I felt more alone than I had since the day they lowered Margaret into the ground. My granddaughter had tried to drug me. She'd stolen $50,000 from me. She tried to kill me on a highway, and now she turned my own son against me with a fake story and a fake bruise. I had evidence. I had documentation. But I also had a restraining order that made me look guilty, and a son who thought I was losing my mind. She had filed a police report, called me dangerous, and now my own son was on the phone, saying he was flying in to deal with me, to talk about options. I knew what that meant. They were going to try to take everything. If you're still watching this story, hit the like button so more people can see it. Because what happens next, that's when I stopped playing defense. That's when I started fighting back. Now let me tell you how I turned everything around when they thought they had already won. The first thing I did was call Thomas Okonkwo. I told him everything, the restraining order, the fake bruise, David flying in to talk about options. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said 3 words, "I'm coming down." Thomas flew into Pensacola that Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, we were sitting in my living room with a retired FBI agent named Marcus Webb, a friend of Thomas's who specialized in elder abuse cases. Marcus had connections with the local DA's office, and more importantly, he knew how to build cases that stuck. "The restraining order is actually a gift," Marcus said, which surprised me. "She filed a false police report. That's a crime. And if we can prove the bruise was self-inflicted, that's perjury. She's not just a thief anymore. She's a criminal who's obstructing justice." "How do we prove the bruise was fake?" I asked. Marcus smiled. "I have some ideas, but first we need to deal with your son." David arrived Saturday morning. I picked him up at the airport. Yes, I know I probably shouldn't have been driving, but Thomas came with me as a witness. David looked tired, worried. He hugged me at the arrivals gate, and I could see in his eyes that he genuinely believed something was wrong with me. That hurt more than anything Kristen had done.
We drove to a coffee shop near the waterfront, neutral territory. Thomas stayed at a nearby table, close enough to hear, but not close enough to seem like a witness. And then David said the words I'd been dreading. "Dad, Kristen thinks we should start the guardianship process. She says you're not safe on your own anymore. She says..." I held up my hand. "David, I need you to do something for me. I need you to look at some documents before we have this conversation." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were the bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers, the digital forensics report showing the keylogger installed on my laptop, installed during the exact week Kristen helped me with my computer, the pharmacy records showing 3 forged prescriptions for sedatives, the mechanics report on my brake lines. David read through everything. His face went from confused to shocked,
to something much, much darker. "She tried to kill you," he whispered. "My daughter tried to kill you." I nodded. I don't think she meant for it to go that far. I think she panicked when she realized I was investigating her. But yes, that's what happened. David put his head in his hands. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "I believed her," he said. "She told me you were losing it. She told me you grabbed her, threatened her. I was ready to sign papers putting you in a home." "I know. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I reached across the table and took my son's hand. "You didn't know," I said. "She's good at this. She's been playing both of us." From that moment on, David was on my side. And with him came something else, something Kristen never saw coming. David started making calls, quiet calls to family members, to friends, to people who'd known Kristen during her marriage. And one of those calls led him to Brandon Warren, Kristen's ex-husband.
Brandon had been through hell with Kristen. The custody battle, the accusations, the legal fees that had drained both their savings. But what David learned went beyond their divorce. Before their marriage ended, Kristen had tried to get power of attorney over Brandon's elderly grandmother. The old woman had dementia, and Kristen had wormed her way in, offering to help with the bills. Brandon's family caught it just in time. They'd kept it quiet to avoid a scandal, but Brandon had never forgotten. "She's done this before," David told me that night. "She's a predator, and she targets old people." Brandon agreed to testify. His lawyers had been looking for evidence of Kristen's character for the custody case, and this was exactly what they needed. Suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. I had witnesses, I had documentation, I had a pattern of behavior. Now I just needed one more thing, proof that the bruise was fake. That's where Marcus Webb came in. He hired a private investigator, a woman named Sandra Reeves, who specialized in insurance fraud. Her job was to follow Kristen for 2 weeks and document everything. On day 8, Sandra hit gold. She captured video of Kristen in her car, parked outside a department store, applying makeup to her forearm, professional-grade bruise makeup, the kind actors use on film sets. She was creating a fresh injury right before a meeting with her attorney. We had her. 2 weeks later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Kristen was throwing a party at the Emerald Bay Country Club, a celebration dinner for family and friends, supposedly to thank everyone for their support during her custody battle. In reality, she expected a favorable ruling any day, funded by the money she'd stolen from me. She'd invited everyone: David, extended family, friends from church. She wanted witnesses to her success, and she probably also wanted to establish that she was a loving, stable person who could never have done the things I was accusing her of. What she didn't know was that the district attorney's office had opened a formal investigation based on Marcus's evidence package. What she didn't know was that Brandon Warren's lawyers had filed an emergency motion in the custody case. What she didn't know was that 2 detectives from the Pensacola Police Department would be waiting in the parking lot with a warrant. Kristen thought she was walking into her victory party. She had no idea what was waiting for her. I arrived at the Emerald Bay Country Club at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening. The main event room was decorated with flowers and candles. About 40 people were there. Family, friends, some faces I recognized and some I didn't. Everyone was dressed nicely, sipping wine, making small talk. Kristen stood near the head table, glowing in a navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. She was laughing at something someone said, looking for all the world like a woman without a care in her life. When she saw me walk in, her smile flickered. I wasn't supposed to be here. The restraining order should have kept me away. But here's the thing about restraining orders. They can be modified, and when you present evidence to a judge that the order was obtained through fraud and that the person who filed it is under criminal investigation, well, judges don't like being used as weapons. My restraining order had been vacated 3 days earlier. Kristen just didn't know it yet. David walked in behind me, then Thomas, then Marcus, then Brandon Warren, her ex-husband, the last person she expected to see. Kristen's smile disappeared completely. She took a step back, looking for an exit, but it was too late. Every eye in the room was on us. Here's where I turned the tables. Here's where 28 years of military intelligence work paid off.
"Everyone, I'm sorry to interrupt the party," I said, my voice calm and clear. "But before Kristen gives her toast, I have a few things I'd like to share with the family." "Grandpa, what are you doing?" Kristen's voice was high and tight. "You're not supposed to be here. There's a restraining order." "The restraining order was vacated," I said, "based on evidence that you fabricated the entire domestic violence claim, including the bruise you created with stage makeup." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the room's display screen, something I'd arranged with the club manager earlier. A video began to play. Kristen, in her car, carefully applying makeup to her forearm, creating a bruise that didn't exist. The room went silent. I heard someone gasp. Kristen's face went white. That's taken out of context." "Let me show you something else," I said. The next slide was a spreadsheet. Bank transfers totaling $47,000 over 18 months, all made through my online banking portal, all sent to accounts Kristen controlled. "My granddaughter has been stealing from me since before my wife died," I said. "She installed spyware on my computer to capture my passwords. Here's the digital forensics report confirming that." Another slide. Thomas's analysis, the keylogger installation date, the GPS tracking on my phone. "She also tried to drug me," I continued. 3 separate times someone tried to fill prescriptions for sedatives in my name. Forged prescriptions. Here's the documentation from Bayview Pharmacy. Pat Delgado appeared on screen via video call, exactly as we'd arranged. "Mr. Hollister's statements are accurate," she said. "I have signed copies of all 3 rejected prescriptions. The signatures were clearly forged." Kristen was shaking now, backing toward the wall. "You're crazy," she said. "You're a paranoid old man. Everyone can see that." "And then," I said, "when I started investigating, she tried to kill me."
The next slide was the mechanic's report, the photographs of the cut brake line, the analysis showing it was deliberately sabotaged. On March 14th, my brakes failed on Highway 98. I'm alive because I knew how to steer into a ditch. The police called it an accident, but forensic analysis of my vehicle shows the brake line was cut. I looked at Kristen. She was pressing herself against the wall, eyes darting around the room, looking for someone, anyone who might still believe her. No one would meet her gaze. "And the reason she's doing all this," I said. "Let me introduce Brandon Warren, Kristen's ex-husband. Brandon, would you like to tell everyone what Kristen did to your grandmother?" Brandon stepped forward. His voice was steady, almost gentle. "Before our divorce," he said, "Kristen tried to obtain power of attorney over my grandmother, who has dementia. She was going to clean out her accounts. My family stopped it just in time. This isn't the first time she's done this. It's a pattern." Kristen lunged at Brandon. "You lying son of a—" 2 men in suits stepped through the side door. Detectives. I recognized them from my meeting with Marcus the week before. "Kristen Warren," the first detective said, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse, and filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent." Kristen screamed. Not words, just a raw animal sound of rage and desperation. She tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. When the detective reached for her arm, she swung at him. And then both detectives had her on the ground, cuffing her hands behind her back. "You can't do this," she screamed. "He's lying. They're all lying. I'm the victim here." But no one was listening anymore. Her carefully constructed facade had shattered in front of 40 witnesses. Her own family was staring at her like they'd never seen her before.
Because they hadn't. They'd seen the mask. Now they were seeing the person underneath. As the detectives led her toward the door, Kristen twisted around and locked eyes with me. The hatred in that look was something I'll never forget. Pure, burning, unfiltered rage. "I deserved that money," she hissed. "You were just going to leave it to rot in some bank, you selfish old man. You never cared about me. You never cared about any of us." I walked toward her. The detectives paused. "Kristen," I said quietly, "I would have given you anything you needed. All you had to do was ask. All you had to do was tell me about the custody battle, about the legal fees, about how scared you were of losing Lily. I would have helped you." Her face crumpled. For just a moment, I saw the little girl again, the one who used to call me Papa Ray. "But you didn't ask," I said. "You lied, you stole, you tried to destroy me, and now you're going to face the consequences." The detectives led her out. The room was silent. 40 people stood there,
trying to process what they'd just witnessed. David came up beside me and put his hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Dad?" I took a deep breath. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." Outside, I could hear Kristen still screaming as they put her in the patrol car. It was over. The legal process took about 8 months from arrest to sentencing. 8 months of depositions, evidence reviews, motions and countermotions. 8 months of watching my granddaughter's lawyers try every trick in the book to minimize what she'd done. It didn't work.
The federal prosecutors charged Kristen with wire fraud and identity theft. The state added elder financial abuse, tampering with a motor vehicle, and filing a false police report. The attempted murder charge was harder to prove. Her defense claimed the brake line could have been cut by someone else, that there was no direct evidence linking her to my truck. So the prosecutors agreed to reduce it to reckless endangerment in exchange for a guilty plea on everything else. Some people asked me if I was disappointed about that, if I wanted her to face the full weight of what she'd done. Honestly, no. What mattered to me was that she couldn't hurt anyone else. What mattered was that there would be a record, a permanent public record, of exactly what kind of person she was. The sentencing hearing was on a gray Tuesday morning in November. The federal courthouse in Pensacola is an imposing building, all marble and flags and serious-looking people in suits. I sat in the gallery with David on one side and Thomas on the other. Pat Delgado was there too, a few rows back. She'd become a friend over the past year. Kristen stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit. No navy blue dress this time, no perfect hair or practiced smile. She looked smaller somehow, deflated. Her lawyer made the usual arguments: difficult childhood, desperate circumstances, the pressure of the custody battle. He asked for leniency, for treatment, for a chance of rehabilitation. Then the prosecutor stood up and laid out everything. The 18 months of systematic theft, the surveillance software, the forged prescriptions, the sabotaged brakes, the fake bruise, the pattern of targeting elderly victims. This was not a desperate act by a woman in crisis, the prosecutor said. This was a calculated, methodical campaign to destroy a man's life and steal everything he had. The defendant showed no remorse, no hesitation, and no mercy. She deserves a sentence that reflects the severity of her crimes.
The judge was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. She'd seen a lot of cases in her career, but even she seemed troubled by this one. "Ms. Warren," she said, "in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a complete betrayal of trust. Your grandfather took you into his home during his most vulnerable moment. He trusted you, he loved you, and you repaid that love with theft, deception, and what I can only describe as attempted murder, regardless of how the charges were ultimately filed." She paused, looking down at her notes. "I am therefore sentencing you to 4 years in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $127,000, representing the funds you stole, plus the cost of the victim's medical treatment and vehicle replacement. You will have no contact with Raymond Hollister or any member of his immediate family during your incarceration or probation period." Kristen didn't react. She just stood there, staring straight ahead, like a statue. "Additionally," the judge continued, "I am forwarding my findings to the family court handling your custody case. While that is not within my jurisdiction, I believe the court should be made aware of the full scope of your conduct." That last part was almost unnecessary. Brandon Warren's lawyers had already filed emergency motions based on the criminal case. 2 weeks after Kristen's sentencing, the family court awarded Brandon full custody of Lily. Kristen's parental rights weren't terminated, not yet, but she would have no contact with her daughter until she completed her sentence and demonstrated significant rehabilitation. 4 years old, that's how old Lily was when her mother went to prison. By the time Kristen gets out, Lily will be 8, old enough to ask questions, old enough to start understanding.
Brandon and I talked after the custody hearing. He's a decent man. I can see that now. He'd been through hell with Kristen, but he'd never stopped fighting for his daughter. He told me I was welcome to visit Lily anytime I wanted, that she should know her great-grandfather. I've taken him up on that offer. Every few weeks, I drive over to his place in Destin and spend an afternoon with Lily. We play in the backyard. I push her on the swings. She calls me Papa Ray, just like her mother used to. It breaks my heart and heals it at the same time. I've started writing letters to her. Not to send now, she's too young to understand, but letters for later.
for when she's 15, 18, 21. Letters explaining who I am, what happened, why her mother did what she did. I don't write those letters out of anger. I write them because someday Lily is going to have questions, and I want her to hear the truth from someone who loves her, not from court records or newspaper articles or bitter family gossip. I want her to know that her great-grandfather never stopped loving her, even after everything. If you're watching this and you think you might be in a similar situation, if you've got a family member who seems a little too interested in your finances, a little too eager to help with your accounts, a little too quick to suggest that maybe you can't handle things on your own anymore, I want you to hear me. Trust your gut. The people who love you don't need your money to prove it. The people who love you don't install spyware on your computer or forge prescriptions in your name or tamper with your brakes. The people who love you tell you the truth, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. I'm 63 now, a little older, a little grayer, a lot more careful about who I trust. But I'm not bitter. I'm not broken.
David and I are closer than we've been in years. He calls every Sunday, flies down once a month. We go fishing in the Gulf, just like we used to when he was a kid. We don't talk about Kristen much. There's not much left to say. Some of the extended family has come back around. Others haven't. That's okay. I've learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when things get hard. Pat Delgado showed up. Thomas Okonkwo showed up. Marcus Webb showed up. They're family now, too. I've started volunteering at a veterans organization here in Pensacola, mentoring young soldiers who are transitioning to civilian life, teaching them that the skills they learned in the military, the discipline, the attention to detail, the ability to stay calm under pressure, those skills translate. They matter. They can save your life, even decades after you hang up the uniform. Mine certainly did. I visit Margaret's grave every Sunday after church. I bring flowers, daisies, her favorite, and I sit on the little bench they put there, and I talk to her. I tell her about my week, about David, about Lily, about the funny thing Thomas said at poker night. I tell her I'm okay, that I'm going to be okay. Sometimes I swear I can feel her there, sitting beside me, telling me she's proud of me, telling me she knew I'd figure it out. She tried to warn me, you know. In that diary, in her final days, she saw what was happening and she tried to protect me. She didn't make it in time, but in a way, she saved me anyway. Because without that diary, I might never have started looking. I might have signed over everything to Kristen. I might have ended up drugged and confused in some facility, wondering what happened to my life. Margaret saved me. She's still saving me, every day. That's the thing about love, the real kind, the kind that lasts. It doesn't end when someone dies. It stays with you. It guides you. It keeps you going when everything else falls apart.
I've got good years left. Maybe 10, maybe 20, maybe more. I'm not going to spend them being angry about what Kristen did. I'm not going to spend them looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. I'm going to spend them living, really living, with the people who matter, doing the things that matter, making whatever time I have left count. That's my revenge, if you want to call it that. Not vengeance, not destruction. Just a good life, well lived, surrounded by people who love me for real. That's the sweetest justice there is. So was I right to do what I did? To investigate my own granddaughter? To build a case against her? To stand up in front of the whole family and expose everything? Or would you have done something different in my place? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know. If this story hit close to home, hit the like button, subscribe to John Vengeance, and tap that bell so you never miss when justice is finally served. Stay fierce, because every story deserves its moment of sweet revenge.